Good morning. Good morning, all. I hope all is well. My name is Danya Perry. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity with the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce. This webinar is presented to you by the Triangle DEI Alliance, and we are so happy that you are participating in this incredible conversation, which is a part of our DEI Rewind series. This series really focuses in on how do we revisit conversations that we've been able to offer up to our regional business community over the last couple of years from our annual conferences. And so we brought back some of our more amazing subject matter experts. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with you from our last year's keynote speaker. What is DNA anyway? How our messages turn into meaning. So this conversation is going to focus on equity and inclusivity are more than just treating people well and making them a part of your process. To live and breathe DEI, a firm must need to not only practice inclusivity, but also give power to all the voices that have something to offer. When we do that, we start to hear and see the world differently. Everyone sees the world through his or her own unique lens. So I'm really excited to talk about how our messages turn into meaning. Now, before we get started, just some virtual housekeeping. So please know, everybody, that this seminar is being recorded. All other participants will be on mute, but we still want you to engage in the conversation. So 2 ways of doing that: raise your virtual hand and also use the Q&A pane, and we will respond and we will give you an opportunity to engage us and engage our speaker. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Joanna Schwartz. She is a tenured full professor of marketing who is about to start her 15th year at Georgia College. She is also a speaker and consultant on issues related to LGBTQIA+ marketing and inclusion. She primarily teaches consumer behavior, integrated marketing communications, and marketing research. She has also created a diversity-focused course on LGBT marketing. She has served as a department chair and an area coordinator for her university's marketing discipline. And I can go on and on and on. I mean, her bio is pretty long. She's done some amazing things. So I'm really excited to introduce to you and give the mic over to Dr. Joanna Schwartz. How are you doing, man?
I'm fine. How have you been? Hopefully everything is, one of the things about this talk and one of the things about the conference itself is that it's important to continue having conversations about diversity. And I think one of the things that we're looking at now is diversity in the age of coronavirus and how that really changes a business perspective, because this is sort of, if you think about DEI as an ongoing investment that you make over time in your firm, one of the things that you have to do is you have to do everything you can to foster that, and at the same time put out the fire, because right now that's really where a lot of businesses are looking. And so it's also one of the reasons why when we're talking about this, it ends up that those things go together. And this was a keynote from last year where we were talking about messages and how they have meaning to the people in our constituencies. We've already figured out that DEI is good for business. I mean, that's something that I think has been really well established in the literature as well as in practice. And so, we kind of have to move from there into what that really means for, for companies and how they operationalize that. And so I'm working on advancing my slides here, but I'm told I have mouse control.
Well,
but
we have several folks that are going to be that has your back, Dr. Schwartz. So
I appreciate that.
But we're really excited about this conversation.
Okay, I've got a mouse that's sitting here, but it's not. Oh wait, okay. I think I got it now. Okay. All right. So it's a morning session, and anytime you have a morning session, hopefully everyone went up to the buffet and got some coffee and and delicious pastries. But one of the things that I wanted to ask, just to start it off, right, is think about diversity in terms of consumer base, right? So what U.S. consumer base has an annual spending of more than $1 trillion? Because really, we can use any number we want, but I always feel like $1 trillion is an awful lot of money. And if that's a consumer base that really is somebody you should focus on, then there's some meaning there. And so, and again, this is the beginning of an entire session of conferences, of sessions. So really, this is just to kind of whet your appetite for the things that we're going to be talking about later. We can't quite get the same level of participation. First of all, this is an online thing. Second of all, I know there's some keyboard entries, but I don't expect anybody to really shout out. But when you look at this question, which of these groups really, comes to mind as being trillion-dollar markets, right? And and I think that last year, one of the things that pretty much the room felt was that, well, trillion-dollar market, that's female consumers, right? And
that's what I thought.
Well, and and in some ways, it's kind of like, well, duh. I mean, there's so many female consumers, it's kind of got to be that. But the part of this that I felt was interesting, and the reason that I wanted to talk about it, is every single one of those groups is $1 trillion market. And so when we say, okay, well, we want to sell to segments, to demographic groups that are viable, one of the things that sometimes we overlook is there's actually a lot of viable markets out there. And as a professor who teaches advertising and consumer behavior, it was sort of natural for me to look at the way that having that kind of inclusivity, having DEI go across different ways to address consumer bases became important. And to sort of keep going with that, one of the things that and one of the things about the way I present is that I need you to just, for now, pretend to trust me until you actually do, because there's going to be a time when I think all this is going to say, oh, yeah, I got it. That makes a lot of sense. But just to start out, think about the type of car, you make and model that that you might expect a lesbian couple to have, right? And I know that probably sounds like, okay, well, that's a weird start. But when you invite a lesbian presenter to a conference, sometimes there's going to be a question that's kind of gay, and this is maybe one of those. But just think about that for a few minutes as I go into a couple more of these sort of opening scenarios, things that I want to use to increase our perspective, to change the way maybe that we're looking at things. And one of them is this idea of intuitive physics. And intuitive physics comes from, there are these two researchers at MIT, Ullman and Mikaya, and one of the things that they did was they looked at how we view likelihood, how we view plausibility of different things. And one of the things that, if you want to take a second and do this, I've listed on here 5 mythical beings. There's an actual battery of these that you can take that have everything from leviathans to Loch Ness monsters to all kind of other creatures, goblins and gremlins, but just of these 5, from most plausible to least plausible, if you could use each number only once, how would you rate these people, right? How would you rate these different creatures? And the fact that we can do that, the fact that we can actually say, okay, well, these are all implausible creatures, but I can tell you right now that anybody going through this exercise, pretty much everybody is going to pick ghosts or angels as first, and maybe dragons third, and it's just sort of tough for tooth fairies these days because nobody's going to put them up there as being fairly plausible.
Tooth fairies
Sorry?
is 3 for me. Tooth fairies is 3 for me. But
A 3. Well, that's higher than tooth fairies. They don't really get a lot of respect. So, but the point is, though, that we can take things that are not plausible and we can rate them against each other in terms of how likely they might be. And one of the reasons that this is important is think about it in terms of Harry Potter, right? I know that if I had a magic wand, it would be much easier for me to practice levitating a feather than it might be to levitate a car, right? And research shows this. It's that if I tried just using my mind or using a wand or whatever I did, I mean, and if you've seen any of the Harry Potter movies, I mean, imagine if you could raise something with your mind, surely it'd be easier to do a feather than a car, right? I mean, that's intuitive physics. Our physics ideas are, even though the law of physics is broken, it's not broken as much. Similarly, we probably think that it's easier to lift a feather with our mind than it would be to change a person into an animal and back. And even, going further than that, it's easier to change a person into an animal than a person into a teacup, right? Because a teacup is inanimate. So we operate in this kind of area where we can perceive things that are not plausible and kind of accept that, well, for something to be possible, right? We have to at least start with it being plausible. And that's one of the reasons that for this conference, it's really important to consider that, well, first of all, diversity means different things to every single person who studies diversity, every single person who tries to enact diversity in their company. Diversity is sort of a different way that it has meaning to them. And like I said, for something to be possible, first we have to think that it's plausible. And one of the things that I think that in business, a lot of people have a problem getting past is that very first hurdle, which is to accept the fact that we actually don't know as much about our customers as we think we do. I know so many people in business and worked in industry for a decade doing radio research. And I mean, I did real hardcore research. I knew our stations, I knew our clientele. I really felt like that was something that I was informed about. It was how I spent my entire day. And for people who spend their entire day working on whatever their product is or their company is, we know our products. But one of the things that really is tough to get around is actually our customers see our products differently than we do. And they have valuable information that can improve our perspective. And so do our employees. And so that idea of accepting that there are things that we don't know, that other people really can give us insights into, is one of the first steps that we have in creating this idea that our perspective can be significantly improved by hearing more voices and bringing more people into the picture. And just in an effort to try to keep things interesting, I pulled this ad from a magazine this year and wanted to we know that advertising tells a story, right? So if you look at this picture of these people who are, they've got a fire, they're in the woods, they drove up in their, cool 4-wheel drive SUV, and they're having a wonderful time camping, right? They're not 6 feet from each other. We're going to cut them some slack. They didn't know at the time. But if you create a story in your mind about that picture, and you can do it, and we all do it, and actually, Danya and I had a really good conversation about this before. that idea that you can really come up with an elaborate story for, what exactly is going on in this picture. So, if you think about that, what is that story to you? What does that mean? And so that brings me to the way that we see the world around us. And this is a car that was in my school parking lot. And so I've walked past it every day, and it's a white Prius, and it's got a Women for Obama bumper sticker on it. I mean, I realize it's been a while, but that's still a signal that a lot of people, want to be able to make, right? So. Mm-hmm. So this the car with the Women for Obama bumper sticker, the comment that I had about it was, well, do you really need the bumper sticker? Because it's a white Prius, and that's so we figure that it's probably driven by a woman. We figure that they're probably a Democrat because that's part of the way that Prius targets its product. I mean, not everybody who buys a Prius is liberal, but that's absolutely one of the targets that they focus on. Mm-hmm. And when we start making assumptions about things, and that's where stereotypes come from, and that's dangerous, because when we're taking information and we're projecting our ideas onto it, we're not really getting the truth. We're getting this version of the truth based on our past experience. So, but going from there, think about this. When you come up to a stoplight, if you see that same Prius in, let's put her in the left lane, just because there's some incongruity to the left lane, and in the right lane is this guy who's driving the Charlie's Angels Mustang. That's an old reference. I'm going to just throw in there though, because I think it's I just really like the way it sounds. But if you pull up into a stoplight and there are two cars waiting, and one is that Mustang and the other is the Prius, which one are you going to get behind, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe if you're not in a hurry, you might get behind the Prius, but I'm going to get behind the Mustang, because I figure when that light goes, that Mustang is ready to leave. I mean, it's got racing stripes. It has angry eyes. You can tell cars have personalities. And so, you can tell whether a car is impatient, or whether a car is actually male or female. It's a thing. Cars have, very physical characteristics that model after people. So again, part of this is we see, a lot of things that that aren't necessarily there, but they're based on some of the way that we look at the world around us. And it's a DEI conference, right? So I rarely get a lot of pushback at a DEI event, because we're kind of singing to the choir, right? You didn't get up and log in and participate in this if this isn't something you care about. But at the same time, I wanted to go old school. I wanted to ask you a really basic question, and this is one I think that y'all can respond to. I think that you can type in a number in your keyboard, and I think that it'll come up for the chamber. I'm not sure if it's actually going to work, but if it does, I'm going to ask you this question. I'd like you to just give me a number, and it's a straightforward one. But how many animals how many animals of each type did Moses have with him on the ark, right? I mean, how many animals of each type did Moses have on the ark, right? And so just type in that answer if you have the opportunity. If it doesn't work, it's technology. Technology doesn't always work.
We have somebody that responded to.
And that's sure too. It's that's a and I'm a teacher, and I teach consumer behavior. One of the things that one of the reasons that I asked that is that there are these researchers, Kahneman and Tversky. They actually won a Nobel Prize for their work in prospect theory. But one of the things that they also mentioned was that the way that we perceive the world, and this gets to stereotypes, it gets to the way we look at cars, it gets to a lot of other things. But if you did say two, the question that I asked, and I asked it twice, was how many animals of each type did Moses have with him on the ark? And Moses wasn't on the ark, as far as I can tell. And yet, if I ask that question to a room full of 60 students, I'll typically have 4 students say 0. 4 students will say 0. Of those 4, 2 will have only said 0 because they've heard the question before. And the reason that that matters, I mean, the reason that that's really important is if you heard 2, it's because I started with a question about the ark, it ended with animals. We go ahead and fill in the rest because we see what we expect to see. And not only do we see what we expect to see, we hear what we expect to hear. So in the picture that I showed you earlier, one of the things that added perspectives bring you is that, keep in mind, we're always working with, incomplete information, always. And we're not trying to make, perfect decisions in an economics sense. It's not possible. We try to make the best decisions that we can. We try to make really good decisions, but we're missing pieces. And because our perspectives are different, one of the things that you may have looked at this picture and seen when I show it to my consumer behavior classes, a lot of times people will say, okay, well, there's a black couple, there's a white couple. Sometimes people will say, there are that the guys are, that there's, 2 interracial couples. But I also teach a class in LGBT marketing, and when I showed this ad to that class, virtually everyone saw a lesbian couple and a gay couple. So none of them were wrong. And one of the things that we want to kind of get to, one of the things that we want to understand is, since none of those people are wrong, and since a lot of people see something different than what I see, I want to know what they see, right? I mean, don't you want that information? Don't you want to be able to add that to your body of knowledge about your products, right? I mean, I think we all really want that added information. And so, and again, since it depends on what we see, what we expect, and like I said, I'm gay, and frankly, you probably know people who are gay. 87% of people in the United States do, and if you know somebody who's gay, then that gives you a little more perspective about the way that person might think than you would go for from the stereotype of the way that LGBT people are shown in media and things like that. So, going from there, like I said, I am assuming that everybody knows someone who's gay, but only 16% of the people in the United States know somebody who's trans. As it happens, I am trans. And when people think about, well, what is somebody who's trans like? Generally, they don't think of me, right? They think of somebody like RuPaul, who actually it ends up is not trans, drag's not trans. I'm not going to try to get into that here, but if you again invite somebody who's trans to a DEI conference, that's one of the places where I say, well, that's one of the reasons why DEI is more complicated than just, there are so many ways that we have diversity in our world and in our country, and we can try to reach that. We can try to appreciate it. We can try to understand it, or we can, kind of close our eyes to it and not know. And so if you don't know someone who's trans, and actually a lot of people know people who are trans, but a lot of people who are trans don't necessarily want that to be a big part of their day. You know, they're not out advocating all the time because many people who are trans pass. And I mean, especially trans guys, because if you're on testosterone for a year, I promise you will not know. So, but the point that I'm trying to make is, well, you probably know someone who's gay, and you probably think, okay, well, they're not the stereotype. Generally, all we have to go on for people who are trans is those media depictions, and the media depictions are horrible. It ends up in the United States that 1 out of 3 people, and these are some real numbers, 1 out of 3 people in the United States believe that I'm mentally ill, based on that alone. And actually, getting back to a slide I showed y'all earlier, more people believe in angels than believe that I actually exist at all. So, and I'm not discounting angels. I'm just saying that one of the things that when we're talking about diversity, I don't like to think of myself as an implausible mythical creature, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And one of the ways that that's played out for me, I actually had, somebody come into my office. It was a member of our campus community, and they said, "Okay, well, yeah, no, I know about trans people. I saw Rocky Horror Picture Show, which so for my next number, I'm going to do a little DEI thing." So you can see the difference between perception, hopefully, and reality, and the perception of DEI versus actually going out of your way to negative message. Now, this is an actual business card that I got from a car dealer in Milledgeville, because I teach in Milledgeville, Georgia, and here's the back of that card. This is the business card that the salesperson was handing out, and they've got on the back of the card they've got their phone number, right? Because it's a business card, but they wanted to be cute. They wanted the card to be cute. They wanted to make a statement, and so they had the lottery as the first number. It's like, okay, in case you win the lottery, here's that number. But then they're also messaging out, so they had the number for the president, they had the number for the governor, and they had the number for the representative from the district. That's just political targeting. I mean, with that right there, all you're really saying is we are a car dealer that recognizes that, we have a very conservative Republican consumer base. The people who run the dealership are part of that group, but the last number on that important number is ICE. And when you put that on your business card, that's deliberate, and it's amplifying a message that really stresses not only a lack of diversity and understanding, but at that point you're really alienating customers, and doing so in a pretty purposeful way. And one of the things about the way that we see the world is that sometimes we recognize, okay, my customer base is conservative, and in the age of coronavirus, how do you take into account the fact that there are some people who are very fear-filled, they're very worried, they're really concerned about things opening back up, and at the same time you've got other customers and employees who want to come into the stores and want hours, and there's a lot of diverging ways that you can look at how you have different perspectives from your different constituencies, and it ends up that you have to appeal to all of those. You have to understand that you'll have employees who are fearful, and you'll have employees who are not, and you'll have customers who really want to start getting things back to the way they were, and some others who are really trepidatious about that and need you to not only be careful and implement, the kind of controls that everybody is saying. It's like, okay, well, this, but not just doing that, but signaling that out, creating that message that you're concerned about caution. So, and part of the reason that I wanted to say that with this is, there's nothing wrong with playing to your core, whoever your core is, but keep in mind that you're judged by your messages. And sometimes your messages hit people that you don't necessarily want them to. So, which brings us to unintentional messaging. That was, like I said, very purposeful. But this is an ad for Dove body wash. And when we think about DEI, does this ad strike you as racist? And in this ad, we've got people who are taking off T-shirts, and underneath the T-shirts are people of different colors. And if I show you that ad and I say, okay, well, do you believe that that ad is racist, right? I don't know your answer, and I don't want to put a poll up on it, but really, one of the things that I can tell you is that some people see that ad as very benign, and some people see that ad as absolutely, exceptionally racist. And one of the things that we need to do as marketers, that we need to do as business people, is understand that. And again, Dove was just trying to be cute. They weren't trying to offend people. So as soon as they realized how a lot of the market saw this, and a lot of the market saw this as very racist, as soon as they realized that, they pulled this ad down. But the fact that they put it up in the first place begins to be the problem. How is it that this, got through the process of, having this be selected as something that, you would actually do? And if you think it's an isolated incident, this is a previous ad that Dove had run. And so when also that this is their previous campaign, which started with a before and after picture, and began with a black woman and transitioned into the after that had a white woman. At some point, it's not a question of, okay, are you trying to be racist? The question is, are you actually really working on not being racist? Are you really starting to take into account the fact that this messaging that we're making really has impacts? And when people start to see your brand that way, it's really hard for them to get that image out of their mind, because habit forms the way that we buy. And when we believe that a company isn't working in our interests, if I believe that a company is very specifically anti-LGBT, I don't really have an incentive to advocate for that brand. I'll just do a couple examples, just because some of these things just I find stunning as a marketing professor. But this is a shoe that Adidas released for Black History Month last year. Everyone was offended, and it took off on social media, and it created exceptional negative publicity for Adidas. I mean, how does a company release an all-white shoe for Black History Month, tying it specifically together? And that the African American market is not trivial for Adidas. It's actually one of the key demographics they go for. In 2018, they sold $1.3 billion worth of Yeezy products. I mean, $1.3 billion just in that side brand. This is a crucial market for Adidas, but that's the kind of tone deafness that they have. And one of the reasons that they have that is because you're only as informed as your perspective, as your workforce. And one of the things Adidas will tout is, like, a lot of people in their organization are Black, but in Adidas they have 340 worldwide vice presidents, 340 across the world. Of those 340, in 2018, 3 were Black, 3 out of 340. and one of them left, bringing them down to 2 because the culture there is really not inclusive. And if you are one of 2 of the 340 Black executives for Adidas, I mean, how much voice do you really feel like you have? How free are you to really give your opinion from a company that, just would release a shoe like this, which, by the way, also was pulled from the market and is now lives in the canon of most offensive, marketing products that big, major companies have ever released. It's incredible tone deafness, and so we can't have a DEI perspective if we don't have inclusivity throughout our organization, and that's one of the reasons that I thought that the Women's World Cup was a great example, because if you think about the Women's World Cup, and obviously, the Olympics have been postponed. They may cancel them if they're not able to run them next year. But think about the women's national team. How many members, and y'all could type this in if you know, but I mean, how many members of the men's national team just over the last 20 years can you name? Just if we've got a random group of people, which this group is not entirely random, but certainly, how many of those names do you have for the men's national team? And then how many of those names do you have for the women's national team? If you think about it, and I'm hoping people are furiously typing away, it's not important that you do that, but if you do, one of the things that I think most people are going to have is they're going to have more names for the women's team.
Yes.
Ever since the 90s, the women's national team has driven U.S. soccer. I don't mean league soccer. I mean FIFA soccer, right? And so the way that soccer on a world stage evolves for us is through that game. But even this century, they were suggesting that the women wear tighter shorts because maybe that'll make people more likely to watch. The men's team makes 4 times as much as the women's team does, even though the men's team, the best they've ever done in a World Cup was they came in 3rd 90 years ago. I mean, 3rd is nice, but 90 years ago, these are the great grandparents of the people who are on the team now. The women have won 4 World Cups in the last 30 years, right? So as a company, if you don't value all of your employees, one of the things that you do is you lose a lot of voice. And one of the things that is going on in FIFA right now is there's a problem at the national level because those people feel undervalued. And when your most important employees feel undervalued, then you've got to look at whether you're doing something wrong. The last point about that is I just thought this was remarkable because the women's team gets lower per diem for travel. And I just was thinking, it's like, how would that go over at my college if we said, oh, okay, well, guys eat more, we're going to give them an extra $5 a day for food. That's just not something, that's not a message that's going to resonate for you. So in terms of the women's national team, I think that that's an issue. And then another thing is that doesn't just start with them, it goes all the way to international FIFA, which as a body tends to not really see the importance of women's contributions. The theme for the last Women's World Cup was Dare to Shine, which it's like they were talking about, it's like, oh, Dare to Shine, like, Disney princesses or something that these women are tough. And if you've watched any of, those games, they weren't daring anything. It's like maybe 30 years ago, women needed to dare to shine in soccer. That team was going out and kicking people's butts, and they'd win by 10 goals, and they'd be fine with that. 13, I think, in one match. But the point, though, is your messaging tells a lot about the way that you see the world. And FIFA doesn't view the women's game with the same importance that they view the men's game. And just to give you an ad about the way that plays out in other areas, Snickers had a Super Bowl commercial, maybe you even saw it. It was a while back, but in the commercial, they weren't trying to offend anybody. All they wanted to do was get across the idea that people really like Snickers. And so they had these two mechanics working in a car shop, and one of them started eating a Snickers, and then the other person started eating it on the other side, and their mouths met in the middle, and they accidentally kissed. And so the quote was, "We accidentally kissed, do something manly." And they both scream, and one of the guys rips the hair out of his chest. They just wanted to be funny. All they were trying to do was get across this idea that Snickers is so delicious that you're so focused on eating it that you might be distracted and not pay attention to your surroundings. And what that message, the way that message went out was, we want to be funny. The way that message came back is, it's really homophobic. The ad was pulled. They had an entire campaign. They had a website set up. They pulled all of it that night and apologized, because that wasn't what they were trying to do, right? That wasn't their intention, but that was their result. And that's where we went from there to the ads with with Betty White. That was the next year. That was their comeback ad, which was just this idea that you're not you and your Snickers. But it gets back to this idea of messaging. How do we say what we want to say in a way that creates inclusivity? And one of the reasons that, okay, this is a rewind, so it's a presentation that we were talking about before. The Chamber had chosen DEI in our DNA as one of their messaging points. And that's a pretty clean message, but one of the things that we have to recognize is that not everybody hears that the same way. Not everybody, because a lot of times, as soon as you say DEI, people think of tracking, and they think of people who are disadvantaged because of DNA that either is in terms of race or just some other kind of perspective. And so this gets back to that idea we were talking about before, is it doesn't really matter what we're saying as much as it matters is what people hear. So the way that messaging process plays out is, how do you create an inclusive message? How do you connect to consumers and pull that into the time of the coronavirus? How do you get messages out about the way that you're structuring a reopening and doing it in a way that is both aware and safe and inclusive? And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. But it starts with, okay, what is it that we really want to say? What's our core message? And then you go from there to the way you actually encode that message and send it out to your constituencies. And you have a lot of constituencies. So when you encode and send that message out, sometimes you're sending out lots of different messages, because, like I said, a fearful group is going to have a lot more, you're going to want to use different touch points with them than you might with a group that is more worried about getting things back to the way they were. So the way we encode our messages is important, and then the way we send those out. And when we send them out, they're decoded. The audience interprets those. They say, okay, well, this is what I take from that. This is what that means to me, and they get meaning from it. And the real point is that what we want to do is we want to get from that first step to the last step, where people actually have the meaning that we wanted to give them in the first place. The DEI example for that was, just this idea that that's a core part of our organization. That's what DNA is. And so let's think about, how do we get across that as an idea, and it was a catchy thing. It made for a quick headline. It sounded good. And as people decoded it, some people decoded it the way that it was meant to be decoded. Other people heard it a little differently. And one of the things that I thought was really important is it's like, okay, well, how can we learn from that? You know, there's ways to take that information. You know, frankly, the chamber addressed it really well. They got people involved. They asked their opinions, and they really created knowledge around that. And much like with, you know, everything else, one of the reasons that we want to get more people involved in this is that the bigger our team is, the more perspectives that we have to work with, you know, the more information that we get. And you know, we need to know when we can act about something. It's like with this, do you want to change the DEI message? And the thing I said at the time is like, well, you've got to know when you need to act, and you need to know when you need not to act. So it gets back to that concept of, it's like, okay, well, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to walk away and know when to run, because most of the key principles in life are somewhere in songs. but that's kind of the way that works. And that's also where DEI can turn into a competitive advantage, because knowledge is power. I mean, there's just no question about it. If you have information that other people don't have, if you have information your competitor doesn't have, then that gives you a powerful advantage in the market. In terms of diversity, when we know better, we do better. Those trillion-dollar markets I was talking about before, and your employees respect you when you respect them. So you can't understand people that you don't listen to. Like I said, I'm part of an LGBT community, but I don't know a single delicate snowflake. And frankly, I am very, very attuned to the fact that everyone's perspective is theirs, and everyone's perspective is valid, whether I agree with it or not. And you have the right to say whatever you want to. I mean, and especially as a business owner, it's up to you to decide what your messaging is. But, you know, I also recognize my right as a consumer. And when you pair those together, one of the things you're going to see is that I'm not going to buy a Nissan from those guys whose business card I showed you earlier, because that doesn't align with my values of the way I see other people. So hopefully, one of the things that, you know, I've kind of gotten across over the course of this presentation is that diversity is a game-changing aspect to your company. The largest companies in the world recognize that and benefit from it, and it has to be purposeful. It has to be something that you actually work to do, because it's easy to hang around people like us. We gravitate toward people who are similar to us. It's easier, it's more comfortable, but we learn from people who are different. And so one of the things that we want is we want to be able to bounce our perspective off of others, but we also really want to be able to get the perspective of people, you know, when it's different from ours. And so, you know, to end that note, one of the things I did want to say is I really appreciate y'all having me here today. I know that getting up at, well, getting up whenever, because there aren't really clocks now, but, you know, logging into a DEI conference, you know, at 9 in the morning, you know, takes some care. And actually, I blew an opportunity, right? Because this could have been a chance to present at a conference while wearing pajama pants, and I didn't do it. I just I can't really say why, but it seems like, okay, well, that's not an opportunity you have every day. It's like I did my keynote in pajamas, but I think it's important to talk about, and I think that the things that the chamber is doing and continuing to do, even in this crisis, to try to really promote the importance of diversity is incredibly important. And And in terms of the way that relates to you and North Carolina, there was a time when it was basically illegal for me to go to the bathroom in North Carolina.
Right.
That changed for one reason. The reason that changed isn't because politicians decided, oh, that's wrong. The reason it changed is because businesses came up and said, hey, we're not going for that. That's not what we're about as a state. And I live in Georgia. I'm used to a little hate, but you don't want that to be an overriding thing that people take away from the way that they see your state or your firm. So that's kind of how I think inclusivity all comes together. So that's my presentation. I'll hand that back over to Danya. If anybody has questions, I would be glad to say whatever I can, answer anything that anyone has.
That's awesome. Can you hear me, Dr. Schwartz?
I can.
Awesome. Well, I had some challenges on my wireless, so I'm now on the phone. But I want to open it up. First of all, before I open it up for Q&A, thank you so much. As always, you've provided some good food for thought, and I have questions myself, but I definitely want to open it up, and I'm going to ask Nora if she doesn't mind to let me know when a question pops up. But let me jump into the first question. How does a company, when you think about those messages and making sure that the intended message is really conveyed the right way, are there some points that you can give some of our business community in terms of steps to ensure that the messages will be received the right way?
Well, I mean, a lot of people obviously do copy testing and things like that, but I think that one of the things that really helps companies is including as many people on your messaging team, your creative team, your strategic team as you possibly can, as many different voices, as many different perspectives as you can get, and also, beyond that, making sure that those people recognize that their opinions are heard and respected. Because you can give me a suggestion that I don't have to take, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate having that input and respect the importance of why you gave it.
It sounds like our leadership and folks that are in the decision-making positions have to be proactive and mindful in ensuring that all voices are around the table. What about let's think about a small business, that maybe they don't have a marketing team. They don't have let's say a huge infrastructure to help with messaging and branding. What advice would you give them?
Well, for smaller businesses, one of the things that they tend to have a better beat on is the demographics that their customer base has. And you also, the benefit of customer participation, customer interaction, customer feedback at every level is important. And so one of the things that you want to do in those situations is try to engage your customers as much as you can. Make sure that when things are being mentioned to your frontline employees, that those go to your managers. So if you've got somebody who's working at a cash register and they're able to convey the way that what they're hearing from the people who buy there, those are some of the ways that you can kind of get that kind of on the ground information without the expense of having expensive research and things like that, and also just trying to really take suggestions seriously in terms of new product or different things that your customer base might be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like there needs to be sort of a continuous feedback loop, not only to your customers, but also your employees to just making sure that you're getting access to information that's necessary in terms of the message that you're trying to create.
Absolutely. And it ends up that your employees generally want to help. I mean, they really, one of the things that I've seen in companies is that a lot of times employees, I mean, that is its own reward for them to be able to help the company move in the right direction. And that also creates an environment where they're being heard. And that also tends to lead to much higher employee satisfaction.
Absolutely. And that's a great point. I recall hearing within a focus group of small businesses, some of the employees talked about the fact that their leadership even asked in itself made them feel like they were a part of that culture, and they felt more included. So I think these are all important areas, and I know we can continue this conversation a lot longer, but once again, I really want to appreciate you being a part of it. Want to also thank those who are attending, and also those that will be checking this out because we will be recording it. But I'd like to also thank our investors of the Triangle DEI Alliance. At our pioneer level, we have the City of Raleigh and also Wake County. These are some of our founding partners. And also Trailblazers, BASF, Green Resources, LexisNexis, and also Red Hat. And we have so many other incredible investors from our leader and ally sectors as well. And we really appreciate all of these individuals and all of these companies that have stood by the Alliance and the work of DEI. And we have such an amazing business community that's really, truly trying to evolve in this space. So again, thank you so much for participating, Dr. Schwartz. Again, as usual, you're amazing. So we really do appreciate you. So thank you so very much.
It was great to take part. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you all have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye.